As we welcome the two new teams to the SEC, let's travel to Austin. Joe Cook from inside Texas. Joe, I don't know about you. I'm thinking back to 2021 when this all went down. And I just remember, covering realignment over the years, like the white whale was always Texas, whether it was them being somewhat in control of the whole Pac-16, all of that. The SEC wanting them, the Big Ten wanting them, and them kind of just still staying with the Big 12. And then it finally changed. How did that change? How did Texas finally come around? Like, because the SEC always wanted them, would have taken them at any point in the past 50 years. But what was it that finally made Texas decide, let's do this?
Part of me thinks it had to do with the change in athletic department leadership. DeLoss Dodds, I think, succeeded Darrell Royal as athletic director. From that point on, he was the men's athletic director. Texas had two separate athletic departments. But whenever these types of situations came up, it seemed like DeLoss was always looking for a partner. Sometimes that was other schools, like the Pac-16 you were mentioning. I think it was like Texas Tech, maybe OU and Oklahoma State.
Texas Tech, Oklahoma State, Texas A&M, and Colorado would have been the other ones. Yeah.
Sometimes it was television networks, and one of those just expired the other day with the longtime deal with ESPN with the Longhorn Network. There was some tumult in the Texas athletic department and the administration as well, with Steve Patterson having a disastrous tenure by every definition, Mike Perrin kind of steadying the ship, and then Texas grasping Chris Del Conte. I think when they got Del Conte, as opposed to what DeLoss would do with looking for a partner, Del Conte started doing what was best for Texas and just saying, you know what, we got to do what we have to do for our own sake. And luckily they found somebody with Oklahoma and Joe Castiglione, who also thought similar. I know those two have a working relationship as well, a great working relationship. Same with UT President Jay Hartzell and OU President Joe Harose. And they started looking out for their own self-interest instead of trying to see, okay, how do we make sure our Southwest Conference or Big 12 brethren are taken care of, when over the last 2 to 3 realignments, all the other schools are trying to look out for themselves and sometimes use Texas, sometimes latch on to Texas. Finally, Texas and of course Oklahoma said, under Del Conte and under the rest of the administration, we need to do what's best for us and go somewhere where not only are we wanted, but we're secure in our future in college athletics.
Well, and Texas was kind of looking out for itself with the Pac-16 when that, basically they played them against the Big 12. The Big 12 offered the better deal where they could start their own network, but that didn't really provide the advantage. It did provide money. Everybody laughs the Longhorn Network, but the Longhorn Network provided a bunch of money. It did the thing it was supposed to do. But it's interesting, Joe, because you talk about security and like, it's strange to think about Texas feeling like it needs security. But if you're Texas and Oklahoma and you're looking at what Indiana gets from the Big Ten and what Ole Miss gets from the SEC or Mississippi State gets from the SEC, it probably does kind of like just make you take a step back.
Yeah, exactly. Even, everybody in the Big 12 got those tier 1 rights, tier 2 rights, and Texas's tier 3 rights outpaced everybody with that Longhorn Network. And over the course of, the next decade, it still wasn't going to match up to like what you mentioned, Indiana, Ole Miss, two schools that are in big conferences, but at least as far as athletic departments go, Texas thinks are in a different category. So, and that's even with a Texas that brings in more revenue than any other athletic department in the country, or is top 3 along with A&M and Ohio State. So they wanted to ensure that, hey, we can keep the big bucks rolling in, but let's kind of set that floor really high as well and make sure that we're not getting outpaced by teams like Ole Miss, like even Mississippi State, like Tennessee, who could then use that money to invest in their staff, invest in facilities. I don't know, maybe in the future now they'll invest in the players directly. Now that money is available to Texas in a similar way, and they're not having to dip in maybe more into that revenue stream, whether it be donations, licensing, all that, as much as they might have had to if they were in the Big 12 and didn't make that move 3 years ago.
So we just showed video of Chris Delcani hugging Steve Sarkisian. And I think that's another interesting part of this, because one thing I thought about when this all went down, because this broke at SEC Media Days in 2021. So that meant Sark had not even coached a game at Texas yet. They were coming off the Tom Herman era, the Charlie Strong era. And my first thought when it all went down was, oh God, Texas might really not like being in the SEC. But how much has changed from a football standpoint for Texas between when they made the decision to enter the league and now as they enter the league, where they may be like kind of co-favorites with Georgia to win the league?
One, I think Steve Sarkisian understood how to build a roster, and there wasn't immediate effects. Everybody remembers right after that announcement, they go to Arkansas and get dog walked by what was Sam Pittman's best team during his tenure. And the jokes rained down, as they should have. Texas did not look ready. They look overmatched. They look, out physicaled, out everything. And they go on to a 5-7 season. Texas during that time made a lot of use of the portal, but it was just to basically fill in holes and fill in needs. The edge position was neglected for most of the Tom Herman era by the design of Todd Orlando's defense. There was only one of those guys on the field. Not a lot of edges want to be the one and have to contend with others. So they had to rebuild the roster there. They did get a lot of very fortunate breaks. Mario Cristobal going from Oregon to Miami helped free up Kelvin Banks, who's going to be a top 10 pick, and also helped free up Cam Williams, who is probably going to be the starter at right tackle this year. They got some fortunate breaks there. They also recruited all the way through the whistle, even with a 5-7 season, and did a good job of signing a top-ranked 2022 class. Arch effect. People want to play with Arch Manning. Texas overcame, that kind of helped to, I don't want to say undo, but it really helped paper over a lot of problems that a 5-7 season can have when you have Arch Manning sign up. Another quality season. Bijan Robinson goes to the NFL after that with the Doak Walker Award. More and more guys are getting drafted after nobody was picked, I think, in the 2022 draft. And tangible progress turned into another strong recruiting class. And that's how it's been built. It's been high school recruiting. I know people look at the additions of Isaiah Bond and Matthew Golden, and of course Quinn Ewers, probably the most important transfer portal addition of all. That was one that was needed. That was one that made a lot of sense after he was fourth string at Ohio State and Texas was still kind of in a quarterback conundrum. That was the biggest one of all. It's led to a lot of these different happenings that have gone on for Texas, but a lot of it is based on that high school recruiting in the trenches, recruiting quality offensive line, recruiting defensive linemen, having proof of concept at the defensive line with Tavondre Sweat and Byron Murphy, and getting the roster ready to handle some of the talented teams and the deeper teams that they're going to be facing on a weekly basis, not just in the SEC, but starting in week 2 at Michigan.
Well, in terms of the SEC, how much did going to Tuscaloosa and winning last year help just create confidence that Texas could go to the SEC and be okay?
I think looking back on it and now being postseason, and I know we've been postseason for a while, I know that's definitely playing a factor within that locker room. But I think at the time, what it did was it proved that they could be a national title contender, and they were by making the 14 playoff. There have been so many jokes, a lot of them justified about Texas, and here's the hype train rolling again. You're going to disappoint, not even make the Big 12 title game while Oklahoma State or Kansas State or Baylor does and wins it. That could probably prove to Texas that, hey, you can go toe-to-toe with anybody. We can go toe-to-toe with anybody, especially an Alabama team that ends up winning the SEC, ends up being just short, I think, on a last play, a poorly blocked play for Jalen Milroe in the Rose Bowl. That win proved that, if they can beat Alabama at Alabama, something Steve Sarkisian likes to brag about, 50 other teams tried it since ULM and only one has joined the Warhawks. That made it so they thought that whatever happened in Big 12 play was going to be able to be overcome, whether that was Malik Murphy stepping in for 2 games, overcoming a pretty rough stretch in the third quarter and being salvaged by Byron Murphy and Barron Sorrell and Tavondre Sweat. Whether that was surviving on the road at Houston in one of the only road games they played against the new Big 12 teams, whether that was responding after losing to Oklahoma and still fighting through to make it through the rest of the season and earn the top seed in the Big 12, and then beating Oklahoma State once they got to that stage. I think it did a lot more at the time just for the 2023 season. But now you start asking those players about it. They think about the fact that they beat that SEC team, that Nick Saban team. And if they are on this roster again after being on that successful Texas team last year, I'm sure it's deep within that locker room that confidence is there, that they should be competing for national championships again. But obviously it's permeated through the program, as a lot of Texas fans feel pretty confident about this year, more so maybe than even last year.
So how excited are Texas fans about the idea of going to the SEC? Because that's one of those that, I always felt like the administration, and you just mentioned before, the administration was what was holding that back. I kind of got the sense that the fans would have been cool with it pretty much any time in the last 20 years.
I get that sense too, and now especially that Texas A&M and Arkansas are going to be conference games again, rivalry games again. I'm sure that's something that a lot of Texas fans are really looking forward to. Not 100%, because I even know some people who they're not happy that they have to go to Fayetteville in November, and they're not happy that some of them aren't even happy that they're
scarred from the last trip. I understand.
Exactly. And some of them are, maybe not all in on wanting to play A&M again. And some of them aren't in on being in the SEC even with those teams. But I think the overwhelming majority are excited because they know that this is one of 2 premier conferences as far as quality of play in the sport. They'd argue it's number 1. It opens the door to so many different locations that Texas has rarely gone to. I think I did the math, like the average stadium size in the Big 12. I think if you include, for Texas purpose, the Cotton Bowl instead of Gaylord Family Stadium, it's like 60 something thousand, something like that, high 60s. In the SEC, even if you include, Vanderbilt, it's in the 70s and I think almost in the 80s. So just these new venues they're going to be going to. New coaches, new rivalries, but also the return of being able to play A&M, being able to play Arkansas, still playing Oklahoma, that being a conference game. I think that's what people are really looking forward to. The novelty of seeing teams like Georgia coming to Austin, seeing teams like Kentucky coming to Austin and Florida as well, but also the regular and the tradition of playing Oklahoma, playing Arkansas, and playing Texas A&M.
Yeah, I believe Texas becomes the 5th 100,000 seat plus stadium in the SEC. So that's it is a different world on that front, but it is, a lot of schools that treat football the same way Texas treats football, which it does feel like there's kind of a like minds thing here. But I'm interested, as Texas does move into the SEC, Texas kind of used to having the big stick in the Big 12, not necessarily on the field, but from an administrative standpoint, it doesn't feel like that's the way things are going to work in the SEC, because you can't really boss around Georgia, Alabama, Auburn, LSU. Like they're kind of in the same boat, it feels like.
I in my brief experience covering him, it doesn't seem like you can really boss around Greg Sankey either. But right. I also have a sense that Texas understands that. I mean, even a couple of years ago, when I was talking to UT President Jay Hartzell and about him going and observing, I think last year's SEC spring meetings, it was observing, watching, listening, learning, seeing how things kind of go. They understand that they are newcomers to this league. Now, they're going to have their preferences, just like any school is going to have preferences. But I think there's an understanding, whether it be at the administration level or the high end of the athletic department with Chris Del Conte, that they aren't that, vote in there that carries a massive weight. They are one of 16 votes. So is Oklahoma. So is, not to pick on anybody, but so is any other team
Yeah.
in that league. And so I think
South Carolina, Kentucky. Yeah.
I think they understand the standing that they're in, and I think that's something they're perfectly okay with because, like I mentioned, they feel like they are secure. They feel like they've placed themselves in a conference and among other schools who have their best interests in mind at the current time, and are going to do everything they can to establish their own security. Texas wanted to be in that. I don't think they want to rock that boat. They just want to be able to reap the same benefits as all the other teams will be going forward as a 16-team league.
So before we get to the rivalry, they got rekindled by this move because there's a lot to talk about with that one. But let's talk about the one that continues with this move, and that's Oklahoma comes with Texas. How important was it for them to kind of work together and do this together?
I think it was critical because I don't know if there's another partner out there for Texas. It helps the league, as Greg Sankey has often talked about, be regionally contiguous. You know, Oklahoma touches Arkansas and Texas. Texas touches Arkansas and Oklahoma and Louisiana. Like that helps keep it all in one big clump. You don't have to separate it like going from Tucson to somewhere like Cincinnati. It's all in one area, couple different time zones, but that's something I think that can be managed. The other thing is that Oklahoma and Texas in their history, I'm pretty sure there are more contests as a non-conference matchup than as a conference matchup. Like it was
for a long time still. It'll take a while to outdo that because
right.
It was Big Eight and Southwest Conference. It was
always
a lot of years.
A non-conference game, and oddly enough, I always remember the last non-conference game was a tie. I think in 1995, and it was just a dismal game. I think it was Schellenberger versus Makovic, so just kind of two weird footnotes in history. But these teams have been together since '96 in the same league. They've competed for Big 12 South championships. They competed against each other in a Big 12 championship in 2018. And they always compete with each other during the second Saturday in October in the Cotton Bowl. And I think that both Chris Del Conte and Joe Castiglione have had, like I mentioned, a great working relationship and realize, look, the Big 12 is not this, long-term solution for us as a conference because, like we mentioned earlier, they're going to keep looking and seeing the disparity in funds. And while the Texas had the Longhorn Network, there were pay-per-view games on Oklahoma. That Army game that we all the
that's right. Remember that guy's foot that everyone's watching on his phone.
Yeah, so that was a pay-per-view game. I think they had linked up with ESPN Plus in the past couple of years for Sooner Vision, but they understood that in order to continue to compete at the highest level, and not just, I know football is what drives everything, but both these athletic departments have very proud programs in a number of both revenue and non-revenue sports. You think of softball and gymnastics at Oklahoma. You think of swimming and tennis and golf and volleyball at Texas, in addition to the men's sports. Like these are programs that like winning, not just on the gridiron, but everywhere. And I think they understood that the next place for them to all find success, but football-driven success primarily, was in the SEC. And again, you look around, who else was Texas going to go to? Maybe Oklahoma could have tried to bring Bedlam over, but I don't think Greg Sankey's interested in Oklahoma State. I don't think Greg Sankey's interested in TCU or Texas Tech. And I've enjoyed watching Texas play all those schools. But I think Greg Sankey understood that it's brands that help make that league. And the two brands that were ended up being available to his league were Texas and Oklahoma, who found a way to, as they have often, work together and make it happen.
And they, have been more collaborative. Well, I mean, we go back to Barry Switzer and Darrell Royal, where they maybe weren't so collaborative, but they've been
a little bit. I mean, Royal had Emily Billard teach them the offense, and that's
true.
That's what boosted Oklahoma to its heights in the 70s. So some collaboration, but I think Darrell Royal would want that one back.
Yeah. Well, but Oklahoma and Texas have generally gotten along in the boardroom and pretty much everywhere except on the field. Not the case with Texas and Texas A&M. This rivalry stopped when Texas A&M left for the SEC. Texas A&M was furious finding out that Texas was going to be admitted into the SEC. And then it felt to me like that Greg Sankey again, and probably a lot of the other high-powered SEC athletic directors and presidents were like, guys, this is best for the league, so suck it up. But we saw it again this week. We saw it again this week with Jim Schlossnagle leaving Texas A&M for Texas to be the baseball coach a day after Texas A&M played for the national title. Like, this rivalry is nasty.
I think there was, so I started my time at Texas in 2012. That was the first year of the Big 12 without A&M and a lot of different schools, but primarily A&M. First year of, A&M in the SEC, Johnny football mania, all that stuff, and a good run, a great run even for Texas A&M. But I'm almost 30. There are a lot of people who are my age who and are entering whatever year they may be at Texas or A&M who have not seen this rivalry. That means that there are a lot of older fans who have seen this rivalry. Remember Case McCoy running down the field, and remember Colt McCoy getting lit up in back-to-back years and going only 2-2 against Texas A&M during his time. But 10 years of all these battles just taking place on the internet and on the recruiting trail, it can dampen it. It definitely can. They would play in other sports, but football is what people care about, especially around Thanksgiving every year in Texas. And for this game to be missing, it was big. I think people were already very excited to see it come back, but I think what happened this past week definitely ratcheted things up, and not just on the baseball diamond, where Texas is very likely to be interested in a lot of the different Aggie players who have already entered into the transfer portal. But I think it ratchets it up for the entire rivalry. Steve Sarkisian was speaking at an event in Houston last month, and he was asked, and in kind of classic Texas way, hey, the Aggies are going to be all in on this one. Are you going to make sure that your team's ready? And he gave a wry smile and said, oh yeah, we're going to be ready. But I think that Texas fans and Texas should expect for whatever is always going to be a tough environment in Kyle Field, maybe the toughest if you're working for EA, and especially when the Longhorns come to town. I would expect for it to ratchet up a little bit, not because they view this not just as a baseball move, but basically a shot across the bow at the entire Aggie athletic department. Again, 3 years after, kind of maybe not necessarily fly by night, but 3 years after Texas was added to the league, really without Texas A&M knowing all that much about it, and crying very loudly at SEC Media Days about, Ross Bjork saying we want to be the only SEC brand in Texas and all that. But, having to, like you said, they eventually fell in line, and they didn't want to be that one vote against it and stand out like a sore thumb. They were wrangled in and part of the unanimous vote for offering.
Yeah, the SEC is a land of unanimous votes, as you'll find out covering the league. They're always unanimous when they're done. Rarely unanimous when they're voted upon, if that makes sense. But it's going to be so fascinating to see these teams play again, because both of them worked very hard to make sure they weren't going to play each other. Because Charlie Strong would get asked about it. Kevin Sumlin would get asked about it. And, for those guys who weren't really there when all that stuff went down, like Kevin Sumlin started after they moved to the SEC, or at least made the decision to move to the SEC. They're like, look, we didn't have anything to do with this. I'd love to play them. It'd be great. But then the administration's like, no. And now you're getting this game. It is, you mentioned, around Thanksgiving. This is how everybody in Texas grew up. That's when Texas and Texas A&M play. That's the game. How fun is it going to be? That first, it's going to be Saturday. It won't be Thursday. But when the Longhorns come out of the tunnel at Kyle Field,
it's going to be crazy. It's going to be. I've been lucky enough to go to some great environments. I'm going to be lucky enough to go to the big house here in September, but I'm pretty sure this will be the loudest stadium I'll have ever been to. I think that you're going to be. I mean, if you look at the secondary ticket market, some of these ticket prices are crazy, and I know College Station and college football go hand in hand, and wanting to see these premier night games, but the thousands of dollars some of these third deck tickets are is something nuts. So I'm really excited for it, not just for the atmosphere, but when the era of the 12-team playoff, and it's not like the cupboard was left completely bare for Mike Elko. They have a quarterback who's got to stay healthy, but is talented. They've got still a lot of members of those strong recruiting classes there. Texas is operating and coming in like they feel like they're a favorite to win the league. Like there could and should be massive implications, not just for the rivalry, but in national college football in that game, which is only going to amp things up more. So I'm really excited to see that. And one other thing, Kyle Field was renovated after the Aggies left for the SEC. So in my experience, I think the last time I went was 2009. It looks a lot different than that. It looked a lot different than that picture right there.
It is bigger and louder now. And I remember the pre-renovation Kyle Field, which was already a pretty loud stadium. And you like in the old press box when they lock arms for the Aggie war hymn and sway, like it would make the press box move. Now it's all closed in. There's nowhere else for that noise to go, and it just reverberates.
I'm excited to go and see it, and I know it's going to be one of the biggest matchups on the college football calendar, and that's going to be part of a great Saturday of college football. I know Chris Del Conte has talked about maybe not wanting that to be on Saturday, wanting it to in years in going forward, and I don't think he got his way this year, wanting it to be on Thanksgiving. But that game to cap off a Saturday, it's going to include Michigan, Ohio State at 11. The 2:30 game, something big too. I'm struggling to remember.
The Iron Bowl is coming up.
Bowl. There we go.
Yeah.
And then,
I mean that's the thing. It is now back in its rightful place on that weekend. Whether it goes to Thanksgiving or not probably has more to do with the NFL than the SEC. Like they probably just don't want to compete against the NFL. And I kind of get that because they're doing the same thing with the Egg Bowl. They don't want, they're going to, and then they're moving Georgia and Georgia Tech are going to play on Friday night. So we'll see how that all shakes out. But just having that game that weekend, like for someone older like me, that's what's supposed to happen. Like Texas and Texas A&M are supposed to play. And so I'm so excited to just see it again.
I'm glad it's back because even if you look at what it's replacing, Texas would play usually one of an in-state school, TCU
or Texas Tech usually, right?
Tech. They got Baylor, I think, once. For some reason, they made a trip to Lawrence, Kansas in 2018, which Hobby Airport was really bustling on Thanksgiving Day that year. But they tried to keep it as an in-state rival. I know the SEC put the LSU and A&M game, but if you probably ask LSU fans, it's just a game on a weekend for them. It's not a rivalry game. This puts it on a rivalry weekend because it's a rivalry game, and it brings back so much meaning. I'm looking forward to seeing what it's going to be like in 2025 as well when Texas gets the Aggies back in Austin, just because it'll be the first time since 2008. Last time Texas was playing A&M in 2008, I remember watching all the people with the 45-35 banners up and trying to convince voters to make sure to put Texas ahead because they had won head-to-head on the field.
They beat Oklahoma. Yeah, exactly.
Art Briles didn't see that way, and it cost Texas in the polls. So they had to settle for a Fiesta Bowl win, but that's the last time Texas played A&M at home. And so I'm looking forward to that next year, but I'm not going to look past that for what should be an awesome environment in College Station this year.
Yeah, it's interesting because Texas Memorial Stadium, it is a different environment now than it was back then. They've juiced the game day operations, the way they handle things, and the crowd. I don't know about you, Joe. It feels like they're louder now than they used to be. They act a lot less like a golf crowd than they used to.
When it gets up, it gets up. Their median, I guess, is even for a big stadium. It's not as loud as you think, but when it is time to get going, that 101,000, 102,000 is really loud, and it is a lot different. When was the last time you had been to a game there?
It's been a while. I did a big story back when I was at SI about all the changes they made after Chris Delcani and Drew Martin got there, and like because it was palpable, you could tell how different it was than some of the I remember I covered a Texas Oklahoma State game. I want to say in like the early teens, and it was a big game in the Big 12, and but it's just for that many people, it didn't seem like everybody was that excited. But they changed the way they handle the games, and it certainly feels like they've made everything bigger than it used to be, and it comes across.
It's been helped by architecture, getting rid of the track basically. The track hadn't been there for a while, but a stadium built for a track that bring everything in. They've got rid of the Godzillatron and made that premium seating that's now more enclosed. But like you said, Chris Del Conte and Drew Martin. Drew Martin's definitely one who deserves a lot of credit for this. They've made sure they understand that when you're going to a Texas football game, you're there if you're a diehard for what's going on the field. But if you're there, maybe once a year, like I know a lot of fans go, you're there for an all-day event. So they try to make it into an all-day event. They try to make it a lot of fun, and they've definitely amped it up. And now, and I'm not trying to disparage these teams, but like when Kansas would come to town or BYU would come to town, Texas has no real history with Kansas. Yes, I know they beat them a couple times, including once in Austin, but there's no real football history with Kansas. There was zero football history with BYU. Even with a good team, it's tough for fans to want to get up about like, oh, there's this team that we know nothing about. They're just from Utah and from Provo, and we've never played them before. With name brands like even Florida, who we don't know how good Florida is going to be, and that's independent of their record. But the Florida Gators are coming to town. The Georgia Bulldogs are coming to town.
Yeah.
Like that is something that a lot of Texas fans are really looking forward to in the SEC. And they're obviously looking forward to the road trips too. I know there's probably not a whole lot of difference between, Ames, Iowa and Auburn, Alabama, when you kind of look around size and stuff like that.
There is in the stadium.
There is in the stadium. There is in the environment. And there is in the care. And I think Texas is excited for that novelty factor too, to go and see that and, hop on I-20 or I-10 and go see what the Southeast has to offer in some of these places that they never have gone to or rarely get to go to.
Well, and that's the thing. Like Texas at Sanford Stadium next year, Texas Between the Hedges is going to be so cool. They're going to be at Between the Hedges and at the Swamp in 2025. Like that's going to be so much fun. Texas at LSU is going to be a ton of fun. There are just so many different matchups. And then obviously they get back going to Fayetteville, having Arkansas come to them. Like that is a bitterly hatred-filled rivalry. And so that is going to be great too. Plus, Texas is going to fill some people's stadiums, even if they don't normally fill. Now, it is like Kentucky fills the stadium anyway. But that's going to be a tough ticket when Texas goes to Lexington.
Yeah, and even looking forward to other trips. Like I've got family from Mississippi. I've been to Starkville before. That's going to be an interesting game.
Oh, those cowbells are loud.
Cowbells are loud. And I know Texas is looking forward to making a return trip to the Grove whenever that happens. And obviously LSU is 6 hours from where I sit. Like that's a trip everybody in kind of Southeast Texas, Austin, San Antonio, Houston is able to make with a pretty regular drive and go see one of the best environments in college football. So there's so much that people are looking forward to. Obviously there's a lot to look forward to in other sports as well. Baseball, as we've mentioned.
They take it as seriously as Texas does. And
right.
So Texas will be around a lot of like-minded people there.
Right, and obviously with volleyball, men's and women's basketball, all the different sports, softball, there's a lot of excitement just for the newness and going and seeing, and also while they're there, seeing what they feel to be elevated competition.
Well, we're gonna find out. Joe, thank you so much, everybody. Well, if you haven't gotten your tickets for Texas, Georgia, your hotel room for Texas, Georgia, you're not going to. The F1 races that weekend too. But this is going to be so much fun. Thank you, Joe.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, subscribe to this channel right here so you never miss an episode of Andy Staples on 3. And oh, by the way, watch all the other great videos on the On3 Sports YouTube channel.